What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
Guys, we have a great episode coming your way today. We're recapping UFC Abu Dhabi. There were several pieces of boxing news and events that happened over the weekend. We're going to recap all of them. Interesting signings to the UFC. We have Parnasse and Robelis Despaigne back. We're going to talk about that, as well as Mike Perry's bout with Dylan Dennis and a few other surprises as well. Everything linked down below in the timestamps. If there's a particular story that you're most interested in, you'll know where to find it. But we have to start, Nick, with UFC Abu Dhabi.
That's right.
For us, you know, on the Barnhill Brothers channel, that was the biggest event of the weekend, right?
For sure.
So Magomed Ankalaev, former champion, coming back after being knocked out by Alex Pereira, supposed to take on Khalil Roundtree, a last-minute replacement for Bogdan Guskov. And really, if I had to sum it up into one word, I would just say levels, right?
Right.
Magomed showed us there's levels to this game, and he's at the top of the division. Bogdan really didn't have anything for him. My main concern for Magomed Ankalaev as a 4.5 to 1 favorite was that Bogdan does possess a lot of power. And when we broke the fight down, I said that if there is one area, because I don't think he's a better grappler, I don't think he's got a higher cage IQ, I don't think he's as good as in the clinch on the cage, even with the striking as far as total striking skills, none of it, except maybe you could say that Bogdan is more powerful than Magomed. So
Sure.
I said, Magomed's got to be careful early. He's got to take his time, cook Bogdan, figure him out and systematically break him down. And I actually predicted a 4th or 5th round TKO, which is exactly what happened.
Good work.
But thank you. And Magomed Ankalaev really showed us that he brought the proper game plan in. He made the right adjustments, even on short notice, and did look like somebody who should be fighting for a belt in his next fight.
Yeah, Magomed looked great in there. You know, the open stance fights always tend to favor the southpaw fighter just because you happen to see right-handed teammates and opponents more often than the right-handed guys see the left-handed opponents.
In life in general, there's just more righties than lefties.
Exactly. So I was actually impressed with his composure, and I have to give credit to Bogdan as well, because even though he was up against it, and there are definitely levels to the game, he's a top 10 guy, but that's different than a former champion who's still sitting at the top of the division. He fought well. He fought smart. Now, he didn't really take any risks early, which I was expecting him to do. When you're training for a 3-round fight, which is what he was getting ready for, and then had to, you know, speed up his fight camp and speed up the weight cut and everything 1 week in advance to get in there with Magomed, I was thinking, okay, he's training for 15 minutes, not 25. That means he's got to start fast and try to get Magomed out of there as quickly as possible. Also, Alex Pereira had the most success against Ankalaev by getting across the cage and just putting the fight on him immediately. Now, Bogdan isn't as good of a fighter or striker as Alex Pereira, but I thought that would be his best plan of attack if he did want to win against Magomed. Instead, he wanted to, you know, feel it out a little bit. And obviously, Magomed is a difficult guy to just close distance on and hit him in the face, which speaks to how good Alex Pereira did in that rematch. But I think Magomed's ability to control the fight and control that open stance battle, which is usually the lead foot. You always want to have your foot on the outside of your opponent. But even more important than that, you want to have your lead hand on top of their lead hand. And Ankalaev was able to do that. So Bogdan was definitely trying to keep his lead foot on the outside of Ankalaev's. And at times he was able to do that. But the whole time he was doing that, Ankalaev had control of his jab hand. And that can be very frustrating. It can limit your offense. And most of the time in open stance, you do have to start everything with a jab. Now, the jab doesn't generally do much. It doesn't land that often because it just runs into their lead hand, but it does set up your attacks with your power side, and Bogdan wasn't really able to find much there. The best shot that he had in the fight, in my opinion, was that first round kick to the head. He was able to throw it, but he didn't throw it with any power. So that's why I was kind of worried for him after I saw that. I was like, okay, he had his opportunity. He put his foot on Ankalaev's head, and Ankalaev didn't even budge. So if he could have put a little power behind that, I think it could have maybe changed the fight a little bit. But all in all, Ankalaev had a very buttoned up game plan. He knew that his opponent was training for 15 minutes and not for a full 5-round, 25-minute fight, which is what he had been training for and has been training for the past several years now. So Ankalaev did a really good job of staying on the feet, scoring and winning the first few rounds pretty handedly. But when that 16th minute came around, the 4th round started, we saw Magomed really push for takedowns and top control. And the ground and pound was really high level. He looked sharp whenever he would get to a dominant position. Obviously, he knew that Bogdan was probably not going to be as well conditioned as he is because he simply wasn't training for a 25-minute fight. But I thought it was a really smart game plan to strike with Bogdan as long as the first 3 rounds went, and then once that was over, take him down to maybe the most taxing thing you can do in MMA, which is grappling and wrestling on the ground. And he did a great job at that. Obviously Ankalaev is known for his knockouts, and when he's not winning by knockout, he's winning by decision. But you don't really have to worry about his submissions. But I thought it was actually a really good opportunity for him to showcase his dominance on the top positions. He would go for a couple submissions here and there, but for the most part, that was just to kill any momentum Bogdan had to get back to his feet, and then he would go right back to his dominant position and find good ground and pound strikes. I thought it was really impressive. Magomed, for taking a fight on short notice, which even though Bogdan is getting the credit for that, Magomed also did the same thing, switching out opponents. He pretty much had a perfect performance against a very tough guy, a durable guy, and a guy with one punch KO power. So I think Magomed Ankalaev winning that fight isn't a surprise to us, but it was good to see him really not be phased at all by the change of the opponent, by the totally different style of fight that he was going to get in there with. I mean, Khalil Roundtree is a totally different fighter than Bogdan Guskov. So credit to Ankalaev. He did a great job.
Yeah, I mean, he did exactly what you would expect him to do as a 4.5 to 1 favorite. He came out, dominated the fight from the beginning, took control on the feet, took it to the ground when necessary, and got a finish against an opponent who does have a lot of power. So I think for Magomed coming back after, going 1-1 with Pereira,
right.
Essentially, he does have a win over Pereira. He did say that he was fighting injured in that last fight. It was a dumb decision to even take the fight. And he said, this is Angry Ank. So maybe we've unlocked a new mythical fighter. Angry Ank is here.
And he might have borrowed Josh Hokett's cape and hoodie. It's like the Darth Vader look. I don't know.
Sith Lord Ank. Yeah, somebody called him that in the live stream yesterday. But, Bogdan Guskov, one point of criticism, and then we'll move into what's next. I would have liked to see a little bit more aggression. He wouldn't even look Ank in the eyes at the weigh-in. Something felt a little off the whole fight week to me. And then for a guy who had 4 knockouts, some of them very early finishes prior to the Jan Blachowicz draw, I was expecting, okay, short notice, you have your opportunity, you're main eventing, you're locked in a cage with a very recent former champion, which we talk about on this show all the time. You don't get a lot of opportunities to fight former champions. There's just not that many of them floating around. And you don't go out there, like you said, the head kick. He landed that head kick, but I'm like, where was the power behind that? Right. Where was the aggression? That's what I would have loved to see out of Bogdan Guskov.
And when there's no pressure on you to win the fight, right? When you're number 9 and you're coming in to take on the former champion who's, right there on the cusp of another title shot, you really don't have the pressure on you. All the pressure is on the guy who's supposed to win the fight.
Well, yeah, and just do something. If you get finished, so what? You got finished anyways.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You just got 3 rounds of a beatdown and then got finished, or 4 rounds of a beatdown and got finished in the 5th. Take a chance in the first round. Yeah. If you go out in the first round or 2, who cares?
Worst case scenario, you get to the back into the dressing room and get your check a few minutes earlier.
Exactly. So, I mean, don't want to kick a guy while he's down. He just lost a fight. So tough go. And he did take that fight when he didn't necessarily have to. But next for Ankalaev, he painted a couple of pictures. So he wants to be active. He was off almost a year after the Pereira loss. He does not want to be off a year again.
I love that.
Me too. And he said, look, I don't know what's going on with Carlos Ulberg. Of course, I'd like to fight Carlos Ulberg for the belt.
They had him ringside or octagon side. I thought they were going to bring him in and maybe do some sort of face-off. He had the Ray-Ban Meta glasses on, so I was expecting some sort of footage to come out from that where he's facing off with Ankalaev, and they basically make the next fight. But to your point, Ankalaev wants to stay active.
Well, yeah, and I don't think they really know when Carlos is coming back.
Right.
So, that's kind of the problem, right, is if we have Magomed Ankalaev, who was off almost a year, he's now 34 years old. Another year from now, he's 35 years old. He's looking to get on with his career, get his belt back, do some big things. And so he said, look, I'll fight Paulo Costa. Now, I believe the assumption is that that would be for an interim title if Olberg is going to be off for an extended period of time. But Carlos also looked fine. I didn't see him on crutches. I didn't see him in a leg boot. He looks like he's recovering well. So maybe Carlos Olberg could come back in 6 months, which I think Magomed should fight within 6 months. So if you think about that, the Yuri, just let me get my dates straight for a second. Yuri versus Carlos was in Miami in April, I believe.
Yeah.
And we're in, July now. So 6 months would be beginning of the year. That may be a little testy for a return. So maybe you do Ank versus Costa. You know, if Hamzat versus Costa was the fight I wanted to see. But if Hamzat is saying, and he said this last night, Hamzat did, after his fighter Abu Bakar Vagayev fought, he said, I could fight today, but I'm waiting on Sean Strickland. So it seems like he's kind of put 205 in the rearview mirror for the moment, which means that Paulo Costa does need an opponent. Yeah. Magomed didn't take a hell of a lot of damage. You could theoretically turn him around in 3 or 4 months. So I say do that. If Carlos Olberg's not going to make some sort of very speedy recovery, do Magomed Ankalaev versus Paulo Costa.
Yeah, and I love Magomed Ankalaev, but he's not exactly the crowd favorite. He's never been the UFC's favorite, right? But he is a great fighter and does deserve to get in there in a title shot again. He was the former champion, and now he's doing what he needs to do to get back to a title shot. But I love that he wants to be active, and another guy that wants to be active, as you said, Paulo Costa. I think Paulo really wanted that Hamzat fight, and I hope that one day we do get to see it. But if we can't get that now, I think that is actually the best opportunity for them to do an interim title. You know, Yuri Prochazka is kind of pulled himself out of the title talks after his last performance, which was a title fight. And there's really nobody else sitting there. You know, we had a few light heavyweights move up to heavyweight, and we're sort of shuffling around the divisions right now. But I think that Paulo Costa has looked very good lately, and he is a massive dude. He's always been too big for 185. I'm excited to see his run at 205, and I maybe the sky's the limit. But if he can beat Ankalaev, we know pretty damn well that he has a good chance at becoming a champion there, and finally, living the dream out of being undisputed champion in the UFC, which is something he obviously has been dreaming of since he was a kid. So I think that's actually the right fight to do. Now, does the UFC like Carlos Olberg enough to take the interim off the table? And if that's the case, will Ankalaev and Paulo Costa be the main event? Because I would suspect that needs to be a 5-round fight.
Oh, 100%.
Would that be the main event of a fight night sometime in early 2027 or even late 2026? Paulo Costa is saying, look, I just want to fight. I don't care who it is. I like Hamzat, but I'm not tied to that idea. Just give me a fight. I'm even willing to go up to heavyweight. So I think we need to get him active, and Ankalaev, as you said, didn't take a whole lot of damage, so I think he could have a pretty quick return to the octagon. Now, I do think that it needs to be a 5-round fight, and that's why I don't really think they need to put those two guys on a numbered event. I think they do just fine at, hopefully not an Apex card, but
no, you can't do that Apex.
Maybe one of the traveling fight nights. That'd be a great option for them. And Paulo Costa, if he can beat the former champion, now you've got a great world title fight with two guys who really weren't in the title discussion until Carlos Olberg got the belt. Obviously, he's hurt now, but having him versus Paulo Costa is actually a very interesting fight, in my opinion, and it would be just a breath of fresh air for the light heavyweight division.
Yeah, or if Ank wins, which I think Ank would probably be the favorite in that. Ank versus Olberg was a great fight. You can make that, but there's a number of things you could do, but suffice it to say, Ankalaev's going to either be in a number one contenders match, an interim title bout, or I believe he's already the number one contender, or an undisputed title bout next.
And why do they have Alex Pereira ranked higher than Ankalaev on the rankings? Because Alex Pereira is a heavyweight, to my knowledge, and I don't think that he has any sights on coming back to 205. But if he were to lose his next fight, which I'm hoping it's Josh Hokett, and it kind of feels like that's the direction they're going to go, if he loses that fight, it may be best for him to go back down to 205. I mean, Alex Pereira is a star. He's finding himself in nothing but world title fights, now in 3 divisions. So if he can't seem to find a win at heavyweight, maybe the best option is to cut down some of that BBL weight that he has put on, go back down to 205. And even though he's not really looking at 205 as his division anymore. Him and Ankalaev have a rubber match that needs to take place. Ankalaev beat him in the first go. He had that epic performance, first round KO of Ankalaev in their rematch. And now the trilogy makes a lot of sense. So I don't know if I'm the only guy that wants to see that trilogy. It's like, it's one of those situations, right? We've got Dricus du Plessis, who just fought last weekend, right? And Sean Strickland. And they will likely at some point have a trilogy, but Dricus is up 2-0. This is actually a better rubber match situation because Ankalaev won the first one. Alex Pereira won the second one. If for some reason he can't find wins at heavyweight, I say go back down and give the fans a trilogy with Ankalaev.
Yeah, I don't hate that at all. That's a really, Alex coming back to the division could always move the needle, and the rubber match is always there. But let's move on to the co-main event, Temirov versus Erceg.
Woo.
Performance of the night, to me, has to go to the 5'3" ball of muscle, Rizvan Temirov. This guy is really, really high level when it comes to output, power. This guy doesn't know what throwing a setup shot is or what throwing like a 25% jab to set up a big shot. No, every single shot that Temirov threw last night had bad intentions and had "I want to knock you out" written all over it. That's exactly what he did in the first round. I love Astro Boy Steve Erceg. He's a fan favorite at 125. He's got such an energetic and lovable personality. You hate to see him go down in the first round like that, especially when he was mounting somewhat of a win streak after he had a 3-fight skid. But Temirov is the story here. He called out Josh Van. He's as exciting as hell, coming off of a 1.5-year suspension, a 1.5-year layoff due to a suspension for performance-enhancing drugs. You never know how somebody's going to come back when they're off the sauce,
Right.
But he clearly optically looked like a ball of muscle.
Yep.
Power at 125, clearly there. Energy clearly there. So whatever he was on, he has found a way to be successful off of it as well. And so, does he get Joshua Van next? We can talk fight first and then get into what's next. But does he get Josh next? Probably not. He beat the top 10. He beat number 10 last night. Yeah. So he'll crack the top 10. He probably needs 1 or 2 more. But the good thing for Temirov is that the way he fights is something that the UFC matchmakers are infatuated with. They are looking for knockouts. And Mike Davis even said it last night himself. He was very upset with his opponent, saying, I thought the UFC was cutting guys like this. Well, one type of guy the UFC is not cutting are fighters like Temirov. So, 1 or 2 more like that, and I could see him in there with Josh.
Yeah, Ramazan Temirov was one of the highlight guys of the entire Abu Dhabi card. When he walked out there and landed the very first strike, which was a spinning kick right to Steve Erceg's gut and put him on his butt, I was like, oh my God, this guy really does want to get him out of here fast. And look, Steve Erceg has lived quite a life in a very short UFC career. I mean, he climbed the ranks, had one of the best rookie years of all time, got into a title fight. Now, he didn't win, but he also was able to find his way back to the win column after suffering some losses. And it does suck to see him lose, but you got to give all the credit to Ramazan Temirov. The dude is absolutely going for people's heads when he gets in that octagon. He does not put any caution to the wind. He doesn't really seem to respect his opponent's power at all. He's really good at actually throwing his heavy shots, and sometimes it compromises his balance, but he actually has a weird way of using that momentum that he's generated off of the heavy shots and just, peeling off to the side to get out of harm's way. And I thought that was interesting. It's maybe not the best style for 5-round environments, but I think if
this guy's not looking to go 5 rounds.
Yeah, I think even if he gets the title fights, he's not going to be looking to go for a full 25 minutes. And there's a lot of fun fights for him at 125. Now, 125 is everybody knows they're the fastest division. Usually there's a ton of technique on display, and the guys that are fighting at 125 have to be very good technicians when it comes to just the skills of all realms of mixed martial arts. Because when you're in a practice room and you fight at 125, you're usually the smallest guy in the practice room, and there's not that many guys around your weight. So you're dealing with 35ers most of the time for your camps. You're dealing with 45ers. Sometimes you might even have to spar a 55er. So you have to get very good, very fast, and very technical to make sure you stay safe, because 55ers, 45ers, that's a whole different level of power that he's dealing with. Maybe not him, but most people at 125. But he seems to throw like he's got bombs in his hands, and he's pretty versatile with his striking too. Like I said, the first kick he threw was a great spinning technique right to the stomach, puts Erceg on his butt. And then he's got finishing instincts. He looks to get on top and tries to dominate the fight from start to finish. Enough good things can't be said about him. I was actually very impressed with his composure, even though he was going to take Steve Urseg's head off. But the finishing sequence, everything we saw out of him was very high level. I think that given the 125 division and the fact that maybe now more than ever, it has like actual finishers in it, right? You've got Josh Van, who's quite a good finisher with the striking. Manel Kopp, quite a good finisher with striking. Add Ramazan Temirov to that list. There's some fun fights at 125, and most people's issue with 125 is that they don't have enough power to knock people out. Well, all three of the guys I just named are like, hold my beer, I'm going to go take this guy's head off. So I know we do Matchmaker Mondays here on the channel. If you want to come by tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Central Time, please come hang out with me. But I'm thinking, after what you said, Azu Almabayev versus Ramazan Temirov might be a perfect next option, and I think it could fit perfectly on the next card out in the Middle East. I think that's like late in this year, maybe October.
Yeah, I love that piece of matchmaking. And guys, that is a live stream, by the way, that Nick does on Monday nights, 8 p.m. Central, usually goes till about 9:30 p.m. Central. 75 to 90 minutes is how long he'll run it, and he makes a match for every winner and loser of the main card. And if there was anything exciting, probably a Walter Walker.
That's right.
On the prelims, he'll make a match for them as well. So make sure you come to that. But Ramazan Temirov, to me, is somebody who's going to be fighting for a belt with one or two more performances like that, because I said, the UFC likes his style. They like a finishing style. And one thing I loved about him last night before we move into the feature bout was that he didn't give up on a move that wasn't working. He thought he had an overhand against Steve Urseg because of the height difference. Sometimes you can throw that overhand up there, sort of dip down. And it made sense to me why he would try that, but Steve did a good job, and he missed it 3 or 4 times, but he kept going back to it. And then that was the shot that started the end of the party. He finally did land it. I like that he didn't necessarily give up on the shot he was looking for, just because Steve, was able to avoid it a few times, because eventually he ran into it.
Right, and when you're that explosive and dynamic, and it also helps that he's 5'3", fighting a 5'8" Urseg, it was actually a great technique, because you really can't trust, just staying in the pocket with somebody that moves as explosively and in and out like Temirov does. So what I thought was interesting is, Urseg is obviously looking out for grappling. I don't think Temirov, even though he's a striker and wants to end fights with vicious KOs, is against going onto the ground and trying to grapple somebody and beat him up on the ground. But I think Urseg was anticipating with one of those motions. Maybe it's the fact that he's 5'3". It looks like he's changing levels to shoot in for a takedown or something, but that does lend for the overhand to be open for him. And I saw exactly what you saw. He had the head of Urseg right in his targets, and he was missing the mark a couple times, not really setting it up with jabs all that much, but clearly he didn't need to do that.
He's not a fan of setting up.
No.
He's a fan of throwing 100% shots every shot.
He lunges in, closes distance in a big way, and then finds his power shot. So I think that I can't remember if he got the bonus or not. I didn't hear. Dana White wasn't there, so obviously we don't know if whenever he's not there, we don't get him at the post-fight press conference. So I don't know who actually left with all the bonus money.
He had to have got a finish bonus. There's no question.
Has to.
No question. I mean, I would say Walter Walker, 5 leg lock submissions in a row. Ramazan Temirov just blasting Steve Urseg into oblivion.
Yeah.
Fight of the night. There's a couple of them, but let's move into what could have been fight of the night, which was Japecki versus Zanyukov. Chanco, John Pork. Chanco's really good, man.
Woo.
Nasty with those elbows, kicked straight to the face. So much so that his entire toe, like all of his toes, went into the mouth of Japecki. The mouthpiece came out.
I wonder if he's got any teeth marks on the top or bottom of his foot.
I would have almost guaranteed that he does. That was he looked really good, right? I mean, what do you want out of a guy who's debuting, who's coming out of Habib's camp?
Right.
Good on the mic too. Afterwards, he was like, "You're familiar Toporia's camp. Well, I come from the camp of Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov." Not even Habib. He just threw out the shout out to Abdulmanap.
OG.
I love Chanco. I think that he's a very exciting striker. I can almost guarantee you that his grappling is going to make systematic improvements, big jumps and improvement from camp to camp when you're on the mats with Islam and training with him. So, we talked about last night in the live stream what would be some fun matchups for him, and everybody kept coming back to Quillian Sawkill. Now, Quillian's got a tough test ahead of him with Matus Gamrot.
Sure.
And he's number 9, and Chanco is currently unranked. He may be ranked come, Tuesday morning. But if Quillian beats Matus Gamrot, he's a little bit further ahead in the line.
Right.
He back of the queue so to speak, for Chanco. But if Quillian did drop that fight to Matus, boy, would that ever be a fun. And I know I'm getting ahead of myself with your Matchmaker Monday. It probably won't be Quillian because of positioning. But what were your thoughts on Chanco's performance, and where do you put the ceiling on this guy? Because, when you come in, he's not to the level of a Gable Steveson, but there's certain fighters that when they make their debut, there's real expectation on the line. It's not even like enough to win. They have to look outstanding. And I feel like Chanco, Gable Steveson, these guys are part of that group.
Yeah, Chanco, or John Pork as the internet knows him, is absolutely championship caliber on the feet. We didn't see a whole lot of work on the ground, but I don't think we need to. He's like a 4-time Muay Thai world champion, really high level techniques on display. And if you don't want to take our word for it, right, on this channel, we cover a lot of fights. I think we know what we're looking at, but all of the competitors in the UFC that were tweeting about that during the fight were like, dude, the inside elbows from Chanco are next level. The push kicks to the face, the way he's able to literally set that push kick up, throw no telegraph on it whatsoever, put it clean on his opponent's face, who, by the way, was an undefeated great prospect as well.
Yeah, Damian Japecki, 24 years old, 10-0, sparring partner of Ilia Topuria. I think 9 out of those 10 wins were finishes, submissions, good grappling. I mean, the UFC didn't throw Chanco a bone in his first fight. They gave him a tough-ass competitor.
Yeah, and look, Jabecki, he's a great fighter. I think he was still trying tooth and nail to get the fight going his way, even in the third round, but Chanco was just far too much for him to deal with, and I think the ceiling's actually very high for Chanco. I'd love to see him in there with some names, because he's one of those guys that, yes, that was a fight night. It was Abu Dhabi. It makes sense that he was on that card, but I think he belongs on numbered events after this. 3-round numbered events, maybe a feature bout, or start a numbered events main card. That's the placement we need for Chanco. Be a lot of fun. Maybe a Bobby Green would be a good fight for him, because Bobby, just got his win over Terrence McKinney. He's a name that people know and love. He'd be down to strike. He's a little bit unorthodox, so it'd be fun to see Chanco tested with that sort of skill set. Now, I would favor Chanco to win that fight and potentially get Bobby Green out of there. But it just depends on how the fight goes. But, the techniques that were on display from Chanco were so high level. Like I said, anytime Jabecki got into a clinch situation, he wound up eating elbows, and some of those ended up doing a whole lot of damage. One of the commentary guys on the desk said, as this fight's going on, Jabecki is looking more and more like Darren the Damage Elkins, which is kind of funny. He didn't have the damage tattooed across his chest, but he did have that, scar tissue building up. Obviously, we're familiar with Darren Elkins always having blood all over his face.
Kind of shaggy, blondish hair. Interesting analogy, but yeah.
I could see it. And so I think that Chanco just going out there and just showing us a full display of mixed martial arts, particularly in the striking, was very telling as to just how good the strikers over in Team Khabib, Team Abdulmanap, whatever you want to call it, Team Nurmagomedov. Nowadays, it's Team Islam. Those guys are so good on the ground. They've basically invented the way that we're supposed to fight up against the cage, and how to get somebody from the clinch or the cage to a body lock position and then drag them to the ground and implement your grappling skills. Obviously, that's always on display with the guys from Team Nurmagomedov, but they're showing us some very high-level striking these days, and when they come in with this full gambit of skills, like, we didn't really see much grappling out of Chanco, but I have to assume his grappling skills are very good. I would have to assume he gets countless rounds with Islam Makhachev, and that just shows you the level that he's at. So even though he's not ranked yet, he's just now getting his opportunities in the UFC. I think even at 31, he's going to have a very promising career. I could see him for sure kind of taking the torch of the lightweight division that has belonged to Team Nurmagomedov since way back in the day, and running with it. The only other person I could see coming from that camp and doing the same thing would be Usman Nurmagomedov, but he's not there yet.
Which he will be.
Yeah, I think
I'm almost sure that he will be.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's going to get a pretty good call from the UFC whenever his PFL contract is done and over with. So I can't wait to see what happens. But if he doesn't make it, at least they've got a backup. He doesn't have the name Nurmagomedov, but he definitely has the fighting style. He's got the beard, and he's got the skills to make up for it.
Well said. And so let's move into some boxing now.
Yeah.
And just real quick, guys, before we move into boxing, we did do an immediate recap live stream last night as soon as the fights wrapped, where we broke down and gave our reaction and thoughts to every single fight on the main card, as well as a few on the prelims. So we only have about an hour on Sundays where we can sit down and do these. So if you want to hear those particular thoughts, they are on that live stream. We'll put a link to it in the description. And so check that out if you want to hear about the other two fights on the main card, as well as some of the prelim fights. But for now, Anthony Joshua, Christian Pringa.
Yeah.
Christian Pringa made things interesting in the first round, getting a knockdown of Anthony Joshua at the 2-minute and 39-second mark. And Anthony Joshua, and he actually knocked him down twice in that round. And Anthony Joshua said in the post-fight, when he was sitting there with Eddie Hearn, those knockdowns felt like, oh crap, I'm about to lose the Fury fight. And he was like, we can't let this happen. I mean, the commentators were kind of clowning him. We were listening in on a couple of different YouTube channels that were making live commentary, and they were making fun of AJ and saying, oh, this is ridiculous. AJ's washed. He's done. You know, you can never count out Anthony Joshua. He's a competitor. You have to remember, this guy was in a serious car accident that took the life of two of his friends not that long ago after the Jake Paul fight. And he's back in there fighting adversity, getting his ass up off the canvas twice and getting a knockout in the second round. It was less than 6 minutes, but boy, was it a wild, 4.5 to 5 minutes time. Congratulations to Anthony Joshua. Now just make the damn Fury fight. And as Eddie Hearn said, it would be a crime against humanity if that fight were not in the UK. So please, all this talk about Vegas and New York City, Madison Square Garden, listen, I'm as American as apple pie, right? If you couldn't tell by the accent, it would be a crime for Joshua and Fury to take place in this country. That has to take place in the UK. The UK fans deserve that. At this point in their career, neither guy is contending to be the best heavyweight in the world. Obviously, Tyson Fury, fought 7 rounds with a 50-year-old on Friday. Anthony Joshua was knocked down by a guy twice that he probably shouldn't have been knocked down against. So we're not talking about the winner of this fight setting the world on fire and becoming the next prospect and world champion. Both these guys had their day as the champion. This is for the English fans. Yeah. You got to do the damn fight in England.
Yeah, Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury both had tune-up fights, as they call it in boxing, and basically both knew that their fight between each other was on the horizon. All you got to do is get through this, stepping stone of a tune-up fight, and you're going to get a massive payday. Hopefully, like you said, it's in the UK. Those fans over there deserve the fight to take place on the home turf, and it can be like a battle of who's the king of the UK, right? And it does suck that it's happening now. I would have loved to have seen that fight 3 or 4 years ago when they were really top heavyweights in the world, but it's still going to be fun to see. And I think both of them, after having this shocking weekend of tune-up fights that were a little bit more difficult than they maybe anticipated, it will be reason to put a little fuel in their fire and get them training a little bit harder for one another. I do predict that fight will be a little bit more fun and exciting, even though both men aren't who they used to be. They're kind of tapering down at the same rate. Tyson Fury got his hand raised. He even kissed the guy on the forehead while he was punching him in the face, which was hilarious. Only Tyson Fury can think to do that kind of stuff.
Well, there's not much to break down either. Like, we saw the kiss, we saw a couple exchanges, but the thing wasn't televised. It's going to be...
It was on Netflix, right?
Well, no, but he has a deal with Netflix.
Yeah.
So there was from what I understand, it was a charity event. It was supposed to be an exhibition, but I was looking at various sources online, and it does show as a win on Tyson Fury's record and a loss on Marouche Wash's record. So I don't know. I don't know the whole specifics of it, but I know that a part of the reason that it wasn't televised was because of Fury's deal with his reality show with his family on Netflix. I guess maybe they're going to parcel out the fight, maybe the whole fight, and that'll be part of an episode.
Yeah.
I don't really know, but we got to see a few clips from people that had cell phones in there, but that was about all we got, and it didn't look like the Tyson Fury that got up off the canvas and outboxed Deontay Wilder in the 12th round, and then finished him. But in the fights thereafter. But
well, one thing that will be televised is Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua, and you could see visibly the sweat pouring off of Eddie Hearn's face as he's sitting ringside and like, oh my God, this fight that I have planned for the end of this year is falling apart at the seams. I had no idea Anthony Joshua was going to get dropped not once, but twice in the first round against a guy who realistically, even though his record looks pretty good, I think he was about 20-1, realistically had no business in there with a guy at the skill level of Anthony Joshua, but he caught him at the right time. And one thing about Pringa, which we have to bring into the situation, is he's very good at starting fights. He's not a boxer that feels you out for a few rounds and then tries to do his work later. If you go look at his resume, it's a whole lot of first round knockouts. And that's why I was looking at it. I was like, this could be a little bit interesting. This fight is a fight that AJ could wind up having to, fight hard to get back in control of if Pringa comes out there and looks the way he does in most of his fights. Now, the level of competition is the big issue. If you're fighting a guy who's a tomato can compared to Anthony Joshua, I can see how a power puncher at 6'5" and 250 pounds can just knock people out with a single strike. But I wasn't expecting him to go out there and put Anthony Joshua on the canvas twice. And then, of course, as that happens, you're like, oh my gosh, the car accident, the age, the amount of miles that have been put on Anthony Joshua's body through a long career of boxing, it's just starting to show. And now he's a shell of himself. But just when you think he's out, you can't fully count him out because he comes back and gets a clean knockout. And look, Pringa knocked him down twice, but he popped back up very quick. It looked like he had his wits about him, totally fine. When Pringa got knocked out, he was out cold. Yeah. And the referee gave him the count. He got to about 8, and he's like, all right, this guy is flailing, trying to grab a hold of the ropes to get himself up to his feet. We're going to call it here. So Anthony Joshua skated by the skin of his teeth. But I think Eddie Hearn was probably the sweatiest guy in the entire arena because he had set up this massive event. And if he's able to promote Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury, that's like boxing royalty for the UK. It's a fight like Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather. Sure, it's happening too late, but a lot of people are going to tune in. I mean, Floyd and Manny still sits at the top of the boxing record books as the most watched fight of all time. So Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury, though it was a little bit more competitive than both of them imagined their tune-up fights to be, they both got through it with a W. So now we can move forward and have that fight. Hopefully we have a simultaneous both men retire after that fight. I'd love to see both guys go out in their home country, retire. Maybe they'll both get on a microphone and serenade the crowd or serenade their wives before we see them ride off into the sunset. But yeah, it was a wild night of boxing, and for less than 6 minutes to take place in the Joshua fight, for him to get Pringa out of there after dealing with the adversity he dealt with in the first round shows that he's still got a little bit left in the chamber.
Well, the funny thing about tune-up fights is the opponents don't look at them as tune-up fights.
No, they look at them as major opportunities to get the biggest name of their entire career on their resume and get that win.
Exactly. And, for me, just selfishly, Christian Pringa did me a solid on Call Sheet last night because I saw this resume and I'm like, okay, this guy's got a ton of first-round knockouts.
That's right.
AJ, we haven't seen him since the car accident. We don't know what's going to happen. And I'm not going to predict for you that Christian Pringa is going to win this fight. But this first round is going to get interesting. Yep. So I did a little, limit set, right? So I was like,
and you look at the line, he had about a 9% chance to win the fight. So anytime you see that, you're like, well, at least I know puncher's chance is thrown out there too often. And when you're dealing with a high level boxer, there really isn't a puncher's chance. But obviously at 6'5", 250 something pounds, he does have a puncher's chance.
Well, more than that. And so I was like, well, I'm going to take it at 9% and I'm going to sell it when it gets to 30%. I'm not going to get greedy. I'm just going to 3X. And that's exactly what I did.
So it was an emotional roller coaster, not only for the fighters in there, but for us watching. And if you had a little skin in the game.
And thank God I didn't get greedy and I set that 3X. But anyways, let's move into a fight that I didn't have any skin in the game on because we just didn't know what Errol Spence was going to look like, right?
Yeah.
So Tim Tszyu, this was kind of a make or break, 3 losses on his record.
Yeah.
When he gets to that top level competition, he tends to lose. Errol Spence is a big name. Only loss on Spence's record prior to last night was Terrence Crawford, who's, arguably the best boxer of this past generation. Errol Spence didn't look good. He looked slower. He looked older. He looked labored. But I will say, I'm going to put all that negative aside for a second because I want to talk about, there's not much to talk about in the fight. The fight was Tim kind of dominated him.
Yeah.
Paulie Malignaggi is literally saying, can we give Errol Spence a sympathy round here? I don't think Errol Spence, former world champion, wants any sympathy from anybody. But, he said in the post-fight, I have my mental faculties. I have investments. I've been smart with my money, and that money earns me money so I can make money without having to fight people. I have a family, and I'm going to go move into the next chapter of my life. He didn't leave it open. He was like, for sure, this is it. I'm done. And I just, before we talk about the fight, want to talk about how we as fight fans should all be so happy to hear that.
Yes.
Because we get a little selfish sometimes. We're like, man, if I'm a diehard Spence fan, I'm like, just come back for one more, bro. You could do it. Just get in a training camp. Just make a little tweak here. But like when you see a guy who can speak clearly, who doesn't appear to have serious brain damage. He had the car accident, but that has nothing to do with boxing. And he's got money and he's got a family and he says that I'm financially set, like that's a win.
Yeah.
And in a sport where we talk mostly UFC on this, channel, not so much boxing. We do talk both, but MMA is our primary focus.
Yeah.
That is not the case for a lot of people that retire from MMA.
Right.
And so when you hear that story, I think it's worth just bringing up and saying that it should make us all happy as fans to hear stuff like that.
Yeah, Errol Spence is a winner. I know he didn't get his hand raised against Tim Tszyu, but the thing about it is this is a great story. A guy that comes from nothing and gets to the level that he's at, and to also be able to understand how the finances work. Just as fast as you win and earn all this money, you can lose it if you change your lifestyles and start, living beyond your means. And everybody knows the fancy cars, the watches, for the most part, are depreciating assets, and they don't really serve you. You're going to wind up losing money on those things. So to hear him say, I've got like a portfolio in real estate, I'm taking care of myself financially, I'm set. This is a win for boxing. It's a win for Errol Spence. I'm happy to see that. And look, he had a very scary moment with that car accident. That could have gone horribly wrong for him.
He could have died.
So you gotta thank your lucky stars, right? You got through a long boxing career since you were a kid, and you can still speak coherently. You didn't take any serious brain damage that is visible to us. You got into a massive car accident in a sports car that was going entirely too fast, but you got out of it unscathed enough to where you could get back in the ring and still compete
and box Terrence Crawford. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
So I would say, all in all, Errol Spence, he beat the game. He doesn't need to do anything else. I don't want to see him at 50 years old like Floyd Mayweather having to take on three opponents in a single year because he's trying to get back some of the money that he's lost or spent or got taken from him. Who knows at this point where all the money's gone for Floyd Mayweather. But Errol Spence saying all this stuff and telling us that and leaving, it felt like when you hear him talking, it's not like he was begrudgingly retiring. He was like, no, I've done it. I had my swan song. I'm passing the torch on to the next generation. I'm passing the torch on to whoever wants to come and take it. But for me, I'm done. And I just like to see that out of guys because way too often, not just in boxing, not just in MMA, in all combat sports, you see guys do one of the hardest jobs in the world, get paid way less than they should, and then they also leave with issues that are lasting a lifetime and can potentially take years off their life. So I think Errol Spence getting out the way he did is him showing that he's done with boxing and not boxing saying he's done with him, which is something that I hear my friend and a friend of the channel, he's been a guest before, Regis Prograis, say. He goes, look, I lost my fight to Conor Benn. I'm done with boxing on my terms. I'm okay with how I left it. He's got a portfolio, right? He's got homes in New Orleans, here in Houston. He's got places out in Vegas. He's investing in all sorts of things. He's going to be just fine. So anytime you see guys like Regis Prograis, Errol Spence Jr. leave the sport and leave in a great financial situation with a legacy that really can't be, discredited in any way, shape, or form, that's just a massive win for them and for boxing.
Well, in our world, fighters, it's like a tale as old as time.
Yeah.
That fighters just typically don't retire very well.
Right.
Look at Dustin Poirier. Dustin's one of my favorite fighters. Now, Dustin seems to have made a pretty big mistake and immediately was like, I'm changing everything about my life. He's in his sobriety journey right now. So
it's going to be good.
It's going to be good.
Yeah.
And
it's not going to be bad anymore.
BJ Penn, tough example.
Yeah.
Other people like that just, Mike Tyson and Floyd Mayweather, combined age of over 100 talking about boxing each other. And it's not because they, just still have something left in the tank. It's because they both need money. Let's be real. So, to see Errol Spence last night say, decisively, I'm done. I was happy to see it. And congratulations to him. He's a fellow Texan. Maybe we'll run into him one day up in Dallas. But let's talk about a couple of the signings, right? So we have Parnasse versus Hooker. So Parnasse, perhaps the biggest winner on that MVP card. He was the only one on the card that you watched, and maybe with the exception of Despaigne, who also re-signed with the UFC, where you said, man, this guy, Salahdine Parnasse, could be in the UFC, and he should be in the UFC. And then boom, fast forward 6 months, he's getting a main event straight out of the gate. So Mike Perry was on the card, big winner. Robelis Despaigne defeated Junior Dos Anjos, now re-signed to the UFC. And Salahdine Parnasse, 28-year-old, really hot prospect from the Netflix card as well, also signed with the UFC. So I feel like there's a bigger story here. Ronda and Francis and these guys Jake Paul were supposed to be putting together a league that was going to rival the UFC. But the people that had the best performances on that card now seem to be coming back to the UFC. Now, is the Despaigne signing just an absolute slap in the face from Dana White to Jake Paul and Ronda Rousey?
You're damn right
so,
it is, yeah.
Because that was Francis's next opponent. And he was like, you know what? We cut this guy, but we changed our mind. We'll take him back. Talk about Salahdine Parnasse first, because, main eventing Dan Hooker in Paris straight out of the gate, that shows that you have high hopes for this young man.
Well, and that's his home country, so that speaks volumes to what
Moroccan and French,
yeah. So he's up there living in France and training in France, and France is coming in pretty strong, right? Obviously, we've known that they've had some fighters in the UFC for a while, but Parnasse getting signed is actually pretty big. And here's my thing about him signing to the UFC: every fighter that's a combat sports athlete, especially if you prioritize mixed martial arts, the goal is to get to the UFC and try to become world champion. That's where the most eyes can see you, the best sponsorship deals, the most legacy can be built within the UFC. And obviously Jake Paul started the Netflix MVP thing. They had a one-off, but it felt to me like, okay, at least we've got our stable of guys. And then just as quick as they got them, they don't have a fight for them booked for a secondary date. So the UFC's like, well, I guess it's open season. We're going to start offering these guys some contracts. And he stole every bit of talent that was on that MVP card away from Jake Paul. And then you've got obviously Ronda Rousey and Gina saying, we're never doing it again. You had a few extra old guys on that card that are not in the shape to be fighting anymore. And then, of course, as you said, Francis Ngannou, who fought Philippe Lins, who had no business being in there as a light heavyweight going up to fight arguably one of the baddest heavyweights of all time in Francis. It felt to me like with Robelis winning and Francis winning, even though Francis is UFC champion caliber and Robelis Despaigne had a very short-lived career in the UFC, it still made the most sense of all fights outside of the UFC for the heavyweight mixed martial arts landscape. But Robelis Despaigne getting signed back to the UFC was for sure Dana White just sticking it to Francis one more good time, because if there's nobody for Francis to fight, and boxing doesn't really want Francis back, we saw what Anthony Joshua just did this weekend, and we saw what he did to Francis Ngannou in the boxing ring. We've also seen Francis in there with Tyson Fury, right? So it's just one of those things where Francis Ngannou is quickly losing all of the pieces on the chessboard for him to fight. Yeah. And he's going to wind up in no man's land where he truly doesn't have any options or avenues to even compete, which is crazy to say, but that's the reality he's living in right now. If he can't get MVP to put on a secondary card, if he can't get Robelis Despaigne, who, I get it, he's not a high-level heavyweight, but he's got single-shot KO power. He's built like a skyscraper, and, it would have been a competitive, fun fight. We saw them fight on the same card. I think it would at least have been interesting as long as it lasted on the feet. But now that gets pulled away from him. And I don't even think Robelis is one of the guys that the UFC goes, oh, we have to have him. We really need to see him. I think he could be champion. I think they just wanted to take him off the table for Francis Ngannou. So fair play to them. I think that he's going to have a rough road if he wants to become a ranked fighter in the UFC's heavyweight division. Even given how shallow the UFC's heavyweight division is, there's just guys that know the playbook and the blueprint on how to beat Robelis, and that's to take him to the ground, because he's not even a white belt as far as grappling is concerned. And most guys that are in that division at least know how to hit a single leg, run the pipe, take you to the ground, and keep you there as long as they need you there to win the fight. So Robelis, even though he's coming back, I don't really see him having that epic of a career in the UFC. But if Dana White can get his dream of screwing Francis Ngannou just one more time, that the beef is still live between those two. The feud still exists. So I get why Dana did that.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm most excited about Parnasse. I think this guy is, I don't know if he's championship material, but he's only 28, so time will tell. Dan Hooker's a great first test, and Dan's always down to...
That's a big test.
Yeah, he's down to stand and bang, and Parnasse is a striker.
Yeah.
He does have some submission wins on his record, pretty well balanced, but I consider him to be, mostly a striker.
He's catching Dan at a good time, too, right? Dan has been in war after war after war. He's BMF material, and, he knows how to bring the fight. He's not going to go out there and lay an egg. Dan Hooker has never been in a boring fight. So Parnasse
that he has control of. If he gets grappled, he gets grappled. But if the fight is striking on the feet, Dan Hooker is going to bring his A game.
For sure. And I think Parnasse is going to want to mix the martial arts a little bit. I think when we saw him fighting on the MVP card, we saw some striking, we saw some grappling, we saw some top position control. So all in all, he's going to want to utilize every aspect of MMA that he's been training for the past, couple decades. So I think this is a good call for him. To be main event in your debut speaks volumes to what the UFC sees out of you, and I don't think they're just bringing him in to get beat up by Dan Hooker. I think that they're bringing him to France so he can headline in front of his people, get a big win over a notable guy, and then it's off to the races.
There we go. Guys, thanks so much for watching this episode. As I said before, make sure you come back tomorrow for Matchmaker Monday, 8 p.m. Central. Monday, every single Monday, and then Thursday, myself and Moneyball MMA do a live stream where we break down every single fight on the upcoming card, starting from the early prelims all the way to the main event, and give our picks and predictions. So that's a live stream as well. Make sure you come back for that. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet and you feel like we earned it today, please do so now. It helps us out tremendously. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
Peace.